The morning the wire cleared, Main Street was rinsed clean by a night of steady rain. The flag outside Harper Hardware hung heavy and dark, and the stoplight at the corner clicked through colors for no one in particular. I poured my coffee into a chipped mug that used to be Margaret's and watched steam stripe the kitchen window, the way it always did when the house was quiet enough to remember its own sounds. The bank's notification arrived with a soft chime on my phone, so ordinary it felt like a joke. Inbound wire, $812,430.16. Numbers, commas, and decimals, where grief and arguments had once lived. That old 30-acre parcel, my father carved out of scrub oak and creekstone, idle since I was a boy, had finally sold to a developer who promised porches and playgrounds and would probably give us beige instead. The lawyer had warned me about the taxes. I'd nodded like a man who had time to worry about spring when winter was still sitting in his bones. I set the phone face down and waited for the room to feel different. It didn't. The refrigerator hummed. The kettle ticked as it cooled. Somewhere down the block, Mrs. Culver's golden retriever barked at a squirrel that had no intention of leaving. Money doesn't change the air, I learned. It changes the people who breathe it. A gust worried the maple outside, and for a second I saw Margaret in the red sweater she wore on Saturdays when she'd make too much chowder and insist we deliver bowls to the neighbors before it skins over. She'd been gone 5 years, and our 3 kids, Lila, Marcus and Troy, had learned to orbit me in a pattern that was predictable as the tides and just as impersonal. They called when something broke, or when something due was suddenly past due. They loved me, I don't doubt that. But their love had grown a handle. It could be pulled on. I rinsed the mug and set it upside down on the rack. The number was still in the phone, still true. $812,430.16. Enough to make the last stretch of life warm and dignified. Enough to loosen the knot of fear that tightens each time the furnace makes a noise you've never heard. Enough to expose every quiet test you mean to give the people who claim you. I walked the creaking path to the garage. Tools hung where my hands remember them better than my head does. The maple-handled hammer from '83, the half-moon scraper that saved our porch, a shoebox of screws that only fit things I no longer own. On the far shelf, a shoehorn of brass caught the light. My father's and his father's. If family stories have any truth left in them, they'd have called the land money. Honest, and maybe that matters. The plan didn't arrive as a plan. It came like breath on a cold day, visible only when you step outside. I would say nothing, not to Lila, who runs her salon like a general, and still texts me on Mother's Day by mistake. Not to Marcus, who speaks the language of returns and risk, and sends me links I don't click. Not to Troy, who bartends nights and promises he's figuring it out, the way people say they're on their way when they haven't left the house. I would simply watch. I would ask small things that cost time more than money. I would note who shows up without being asked a second time. My phone lit again. Marcus, Dad, quick check. Did you reconsider that index fund we talked about? Market's green today. Could be a good entry. He'd suggested it last month when I mentioned the water heater coughing. I'd thanked him and changed the subject to baseball. He'd pivoted back with the gracious persistence of a man who bills by the hour. I typed a reply and held it unsent. Let me think on it. I erased it. I typed, not today, son. Got a few things to handle. Sent. At 10 I walked to town. The sidewalk wandered past the bakery and the barber and a storefront that had been 4 different dreams and one long for lease sign. I nodded to people who knew my life in headlines. Margaret's gone. The kids are grown. The house is too big. The man is still walking. At the bank, the lobby smelled like lemon cleaner and old paper. I shook hands with a teller who couldn't have been born when I retired, and signed where she told me to sign, acknowledging the wire as if it might take offense. "You must be thrilled, Mr. Harper," she said, not unkindly, once I told her it was land and not lottery. "Money like that can fix a lot." "It can," I said, "or it can show you what's not fixable." She smiled the way people smile at things they don't have time to understand, and slid me a new debit card with a chip that promised to be safer than the last one. On the way home, I stopped by the river. The water moved with the confident patience of something that had decided on a destination 1,000 years ago. I sat on a bench slick with rain and let the cold push through my coat. "If you were here," I told the air, "you'd tell me to tell them." Margaret would have. She believed honesty was a kindness even when it hurt. But she also believed people tell you who they are, if you let them talk long enough. Back at the house, I wrote 3 sentences on a yellow legal pad. Leila, ask for a ride to a doctor across town, short notice, mid-appointment. Marcus, ask for advice, not control, see where he lands. Troy, lost something small that matters to me, not money. Ask him to help find it. I capped the pen and rested my hand on the pad. The plan was not vengeance, it was clarity. Silence can be a cruel teacher, but it's the only one people don't argue with. The phone buzzed one last time before dusk. "Leila, you free Saturday? Kayla's got a tournament. Could use gas dollar. Also, can you pick up Mason Friday after school?" I stared at the message and felt the wire in my account like a stone in my pocket, heavy and secret. I typed Friday. I might need a hand myself. "Can we talk in the morning?" Sent. Outside, the town set its lights like stars in deliberate windows. Inside, the house gathered itself around me. The number on the phone meant I could do almost anything. For now, I chose to do nothing at all, but wait and see who would cross a small river when I asked. Friday morning came with a deceptive kind of light, the pale, crisp sunshine that makes the frost on the grass sparkle, even while the cold still bites through your coat. The house felt unusually still. The only sounds were the slow tick of the wall clock in the kitchen and the occasional groan of the furnace coming to life. My yellow legal pad lay open on the table, the ink from yesterday still fresh enough to glisten where I'd underlined, "Leila, doctor's ride." I lingered over my coffee longer than usual, watching the steam curl up in ribbons. This was supposed to be the simplest test, something small, something any daughter could manage without rearranging her whole life. It wasn't about the miles to Greenfield, or even the money for gas. It was about seeing if she could step away from her world for a short while, to be part of mine. At exactly 9:15, I picked up the phone. The number I'd dialed 1,000 times rang only once before a blast of background noise spilled into my ear. Hair dryers whirring, snippets of chatter overlapping, the metallic snip of scissors, someone laughing at a joke I couldn't quite catch. "Dad, is everything okay?" Lila's voice came quick and distracted, as though she was speaking with one eye on the clock and one hand in a customer's hair. "Morning, sweetheart," I said, lowering my voice slightly and adding just enough hesitation to make it believable. "I've been having a little tightness in my chest this week. My doctor called first thing. He wants me to come in today, says he can fit me in at 11, over at the cardiology clinic in Greenfield." "Greenfield?" She repeated it like I'd just named a city on the other side of the country. "Dad, that's 40 minutes away. Can't you call Troy or Marcus? I've got back-to-back appointments today. Fridays are slammed." I took a quiet breath before answering. I wouldn't ask if I didn't need to. I don't think I should drive that far feeling like this. It'd be better to have someone with me. There was a pause, and the sound of her moving through the salon filtered down the line, heels clicking on tile, the low hum of a dryer getting louder. "Dad, I'm in the middle of Mrs. Hendrix's color right now." She's a big spender, and if I cancel she'll go to that new place on Maple Street. I can't just walk out. I see, I said. So, you can't help. She let out a breath that wasn't quite a sigh, but it carried the same weight. Not today, but you could call a cab. What's that? $30, maybe $40. If you send me your account number, I'll transfer it after my shift. It's not that I don't care, Dad. It's just bad timing. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling while the phone sat warm against my ear. I understand, I murmured. And then, without the faintest hesitation, she added, "Oh, since we're talking, there's this charity gala next week. I saw a dress on sale at Bloom's. It's still pricey, but all the other girls will be wearing designer. I can't show up looking cheap. Think you could help me with that too?" The words hung between us like smoke. My hands tightened around the phone. She'd taken my medical worry and folded it neatly into her own wish list. "I'll think about it," I said, keeping my tone as even as possible. "Thanks, Dad. Good luck at the doctor." And just like that, the line went dead, replaced by the faint echo of salon chatter, still ringing in my ears. I sat for a moment, phone in hand, letting the quiet rush back into the room. Then I picked up the pen and wrote in the margin beside her name, "Failed, prioritized work and dress over father's health." I underlined, "dress" twice. The rest of the morning crawled by. I stepped out onto the porch at one point, watching a delivery truck lumber past, while the neighbor's dog barked as if it was a personal insult. Across the street, Mrs. Harkins was wrestling a soggy bag of leaves toward the curb, muttering at it like an old adversary. The kind of small-town scenery Margaret used to point out with fond amusement. By afternoon, the clouds had gathered again, muting the thin sunlight. I stood at the window with my coffee, thinking about the next name on the list. Marcus, my eldest, the numbers man, as he liked to call himself. If Lila's weakness was putting her own comfort ahead of others, Marcus's was a need to steer the ship, even when the ship wasn't his. I knew exactly how to set his test. It would be about money, but not the land money, just enough to be tempting. I'd ask for advice, make myself sound a little unsure, see if he could offer guidance without trying to grab the wheel. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the legal pad open, the house lit only by the warm circle of the lamp. Outside, a street light flickered in the wind, and somewhere down the block a car door slammed. I could almost hear Margaret's voice, reminding me that it's not the answers people give that matter most. It's how they handle the question. Tomorrow, I'd make the call. Saturday morning brought the kind of grey light that doesn't belong to any season. It slid across the kitchen table in thin stripes through the blinds, washing the yellow legal pad in pale silver. I'd already circled Marcus, investment advice twice before finishing my first cup of coffee. Marcus had always been my responsible one, at least in the way people mean when they're talking about paychecks and pressed shirts. He liked to say he spoke the language of numbers, that every problem had a formula waiting to be solved, if you just looked hard enough. But I knew the other side of that, his need to be in charge, to correct, to adjust the wheel, until it pointed exactly where he thought it should go. At 10:30, I dialed his office number. He picked up on the second ring. His voice clipped but professional. Marcus Harper. In the background, I caught the faint hum of computers and the murmur of other voices, like an orchestra of busy people, all playing their own separate pieces. "Morning, son," I said. "Got a few minutes? I've run into something I could use your help with." "Sure, Dad," he replied, the sound of keyboard keys clicking immediately joining his tone, as if he was already half reading an email. "What's going on?" I let a bit of uncertainty into my voice. "I've been looking through some of my old paperwork. Turns out I've got about $15,000 sitting in savings bonds and a money market account. The interest is barely worth the stamp to cash it out. I thought maybe I should move it somewhere smarter. But to be honest, all these options, stocks, mutual funds, whatever's in those commercials, they just confuse me. The clicking stopped. 15,000? He repeated it slowly, like testing the number on his tongue. Dad, you shouldn't have money just sitting there. That's dead capital. You need to put it to work. That's why I called, I said. I thought maybe you could walk me through my options. There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his tone had shifted into the patient, slightly patronizing register he used when explaining things to people he considered uninformed. Honestly, Dad, the best thing you could do is hand it over to me to manage for you. I've got the platforms, the market access, the algorithms to make it grow. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing. I was hoping to understand the choices myself, I said lightly, though the note in his voice had already confirmed my suspicion. That's admirable, he said, but you've got to be realistic. The markets move fast, and at your age, he stopped short, maybe realizing how that sounded, then tried again. I just mean it takes a lot of monitoring. You can't make the right calls without experience. Let me set up an account in your name, but I'll handle all the trades. You'll thank me in 6 months, when your balance is up 30%. I looked out the window at a maple tree, dropping its last leaves in the wind. So you wouldn't just give me advice? It's not about advice, Marcus said, his words tightening. It's about making sure you don't waste what you've got. Look, you spend $20 a week on those lottery tickets. This is the exact opposite. This is a calculated investment. That last jab almost made me laugh, though I kept it to myself. If only he knew how those wasted tickets had changed my bank account. I'll think about it, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Don't think too long, he said. Opportunities don't wait for indecision. When I hung up, the house was so quiet I could hear the low hum of the refrigerator in the next room. I picked up my pen and wrote under his name. Failed, turned request for advice into a bid for control. Dismissed understanding in favor of taking the reins. 2 down. I leaned back in my chair and let my eyes rest on the last name on the pad. Troy. My youngest, the charming one, if you asked anyone who'd met him at a party, the one who could make you laugh, even when you didn't want to. But charm doesn't pay rent, and charm doesn't keep promises. Troy's test would be different. Not money to invest, not a ride to an appointment. I'd make it about something small but personal, something that mattered to me alone. I wanted to see if he'd put aside his evening plans to help, or if he'd find a way to make it someone else's problem. The sun had already started to slide behind the trees when I closed the pad. Tomorrow night, I'd make the call. Sunday evening crept in earlier than it should have, the kind of dusk that feels like the day gave up too soon. The streetlights outside blinked awake, one by one, casting small pools of amber on the quiet road. I sat at the kitchen table with the phone in front of me, the yellow pad open to the last name on my list. Troy, help with something personal. Troy has always been my wild card. At 35, he's had more jobs than I can remember, more stories than most men, twice his age, and a talent for sidestepping responsibility so smoothly you almost believe it's a dance move. He's not a bad man, just a man who keeps his own comfort in the center of the frame. At 7:45, I dialed his number. It rang 3 times before he picked up, the noise of clinking glasses and muffled laughter spilling through the receiver. "Dad, hey, what's up?" he said, his voice warm and easy. "Evening, son," I replied. "I've run into a bit of a problem. I was at Riverside Park this afternoon, and somewhere between the bench by the water and my truck, I must have dropped my wallet. Had my driver's license in there, a couple of cards, and this week's pension check, 150 in cash. I've retraced my steps, but I can't find it. I thought maybe you could give me a hand looking, maybe even file a police report with me. There was a pause, and in that gap I could hear the faint swell of music, the low rumble of conversation from the bar where he worked. "That's rough," he said finally. "Did you call the park office? They've probably got a lost and found." "They're closed till morning," I told him. "I'd just feel better knowing I did everything I could tonight. You know, before it gets dark." He laughed softly, like I'd made a joke. "Dad, it's already dark, and I'm on shift. Sunday nights are decent for tips, and I'm covering for Pete, so I can't just walk out." "It wouldn't take more than an hour," I said. "If you could spare it." Honestly, his tone shifted, that practiced casualness that people use when they're about to say no. "I'm already down about 300 from poker last week. I really can't afford to miss work tonight. Maybe you could ask Marcus? He's got that office job money." I let the silence hold for a beat before answering. "So, you can't help?" "I wish I could, Dad. Really. But you'll figure it out. You always do." When the line went dead, I stared at the phone a moment longer, the hum of the refrigerator in the background louder than it had been all night. I picked up my pen and wrote, "Failed. Past responsibility elsewhere. Chose convenience over effort. 3 names, 3 tests, 3 failures." I'd told myself I was prepared for this possibility, but seeing it in ink made it heavier. The pad sat there like a verdict. I closed it and set it aside. My mind went to someone who hadn't been on the list. My nephew Adam. He lived 4 hours south, taught history at a small college, and called me a few times a year for no reason other than to check in. No requests, no favors, just conversation. Maybe it was time to make a different kind of call. Monday evening brought a wind that rattled the loose siding on the garage and chased the last brittle leaves down the driveway. I'd just finished washing the dinner dishes when I saw the yellow legal pad sitting on the counter, still open to the page with the 3 names and 3 underlined failures. I didn't need to stare at it long. The verdict was already written. But the sight of it pushed me towards something I hadn't planned, dialing a number that wasn't on the test list. Adam. My nephew lived down in Fairview, a small town where the college bell tower still marked the hour and the corner diner knew everyone's coffee order before they sat down. He taught American history there, the kind of steady, modest life his father, my late brother Tom, would have been proud of. In the years since Margaret passed, Adam had been one of the few relatives who called me for no reason other than to talk. No. While I've got you on the line, favors tacked to the end. No calculated warmth, just family. I scrolled to his name and tapped call. It rang twice. "Uncle Dan?" His voice came bright and unguarded, like sunlight through clean glass. "Man, I was just thinking about you this weekend. How's life up there?" I found myself smiling without meaning to. Quiet. The kind of quiet that can be good if you've earned it. "How's teaching?" "Midterms are eating me alive," he laughed. "But hey, that's the job. Actually, the reason I called, well, part of it, Mom mentioned she heard you've had some family tension lately. You okay?" The question caught me off guard, not because of what he asked, but because of what he didn't. No preamble, no maneuvering toward a request. Just concern. "I'm managing," I said, easing into the chair by the window. "You know how it is, families go through seasons." "True," he replied, and I could hear papers shuffling in the background, like he'd been grading before I called. "But sometimes people take advantage when they think you'll always be there. Don't let them wear you down." I was quiet for a moment, letting his words settle. "That's a fair point. Look," Adam went on, "I know you've got your pride, but if you ever need anything, money, help around the house, someone to split a beer with, I'm there. I'll drive up this weekend if you want." The simplicity of it hit harder than I expected. No hesitation. No tally in his head about what it might cost him. Just an open offer. "That's very kind," I said. "It's not kindness," he countered. "It's family. You and Dad always taught me that. After he died, you were the one who made sure I had what I needed for school. Remember that check you sent for my textbooks freshman year? I never forgot that." I did remember. A little over $2,000 scraped together from overtime shifts, sent without a second thought. He'd paid it back in full over the next few years, and sent thank you notes every time. "You made it easy to help you," I said. He chuckled. "Well, I hope I can return the favor someday. Seriously, Uncle Dan." No questions asked. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, the pad still open on the counter. I flipped to a clean page and wrote at the top, "Adam Harper, true family." The decision I'd been circling for days finally solidified. The money from the land sale wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to someone who understood what family was meant to be. I closed the pad, turned off the kitchen light, and let the house settle around me. Outside, the wind had quieted, and for the first time in a while, the silence felt like peace rather than absence. Tomorrow, I would begin making plans. Tuesday morning broke with a thin layer of frost on the grass, and the smell of cold iron in the air. I stood at the kitchen counter, coffee in hand, watching my breath fog the window above the sink. The yellow pad was still on the table where I'd left it last night, open to Adam's name written in dark, deliberate strokes. It was time to move from thoughts to action. I pulled the folder from the bottom drawer of the desk in the spare room, the one where Margaret used to keep our tax records and insurance policies. Inside were the property sale documents, the bank's confirmation of the wire, and a few brochures the attorney had given me about trusts and transfers. The papers smelled faintly of the manila envelope they'd been riding in, like dust and cardboard. I sat down at the desk, the morning light falling across the page as I began drafting what needed to happen. Step 1. Secure the money so it couldn't be sniffed out by anyone who thought they had a claim. Step 2. Structure it in a way that would make it a gift, not a burden for Adam. Step 3. Prepare myself for the fallout when my kids found out they weren't in the will for a dime. The bank manager, a man named Keller, with sharp suits and a voice that always sounded like he was mid-negotiation, called me back within an hour of my leaving a message. I told him I wanted to move the bulk of the funds into a separate account with restricted access. He didn't ask why, just explained the paperwork, and told me to come in that afternoon. Before I left, I walked out to the garage. The chill inside smelled of motor oil and old wood. In the corner, under a tarp, sat the cedar chest that had been my father's. I ran my hand over the lid, feeling the grooves of the brass hinges. Inside was the kind of family history you can't put a price on: Margaret's wedding ring, a stack of letters she wrote me when I was overseas, Adam's high school graduation photo with a note on the back in my brother Tom's handwriting. I added one more thing to the chest, a photocopy of the property sale check, and a letter addressed to Adam, sealed and signed. It wasn't the legal transfer that would come through the bank. This was something different, something he could hold. At the bank, Keller led me into his office and shut the door. "We'll open a new account in your name," he said, sliding forms across the desk. "No linked cards, no online access. If you want to move anything, it has to be in person with ID." "That'll do," I said, signing where he pointed. When it came to naming a beneficiary, I didn't hesitate. "Adam Harper," I told him. "Relation, nephew." Keller's pen paused over the form for half a beat. "You sure you don't want to split it among your kids?" "I'm sure," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "Adam's earned it." By the time I left, the money was sealed behind the quiet protection of paperwork and protocol. Outside, the wind had picked up, tugging at my coat as I crossed the parking lot. Driving home, I passed the Rusty Anchor, the old restaurant where Margaret and I had celebrated birthdays and anniversaries. A thought slid into place. That's where I'd bring the kids together. One table, one dinner, and one truth they wouldn't see coming. I could already picture the way they'd look at each other when I told them. The first invitations would go out tomorrow. Wednesday morning brought a low ceiling of clouds over town, the kind that made the street lamps stay on long after they should have gone dark. I sat at the kitchen table with the phone in front of me, the yellow pad beside it, and the name of each child written in neat block letters. Under each name, I'd already written a single word. Failed. It was time to invite them. I decided to call Lila first. She always kept her phone close for work, even if she didn't answer right away. The line clicked after 2 rings, the familiar background of dryers and chatter bleeding through. "Dad, everything okay?" she asked. "Fine," I said, letting my tone stay neutral. "I was thinking we haven't had a proper family dinner in a while. How about Saturday night at the Rusty Anchor?" 6 o'clock. Bring the kids. There was a pause, then a change in her voice. Lighter, almost playful. "If you're paying, why not? Kayla's got soccer until 4, but we can make it." "Good. I'll make the reservation," I said. By the time I hung up, I could already see her telling herself the dinner might mean something. Maybe an announcement. Maybe a gift. The thought didn't bother me. It would make the truth hit harder. Next was Marcus. His office line picked up after a long hold with a receptionist who sounded suspicious of everyone. "Marcus Harper," he said, clipped as ever. "Dinner at the Rusty Anchor. Saturday at 6. Whole family," I told him. "What's the occasion?" His tone was all calculation. No warmth. "Just want everyone together," I said. "You sure this isn't about the lottery ticket thing?" He chuckled, but it was the sort of chuckle that comes from a man probing for the real story. "No," I said flatly. "It's about dinner. We'll be there," he replied, and I could hear him still trying to fit it into a narrative in his head before we hung up. "Finally, Troy," he answered mid-shift, the clink of glasses and a jukebox humming behind him. "Dad, you coming in for a drink?" "Not tonight," I said. "Dinner, Rusty Anchor, Saturday at 6. Be there." "Sure," he said, without hesitation. "If you're paying, I'm eating steak." "Wouldn't expect less," I told him. When I hung up the last call, the kitchen felt even quieter than before, as if the house itself understood what was coming. I reached for the pad and wrote at the top of a fresh page, "Saturday Final Reckoning." I imagined the table in the corner, the smell of fried fish and old wood, the hum of conversations around us. I could almost hear the moment the air would shift when I put the truth between us. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to anticipation. Saturday arrived with the kind of restless weather that can't decide what it wants to be. One minute the sun flashed through the clouds. The next a shadow draped the town like a heavy curtain. I spent the morning pacing the house, checking the clock more than I needed to, the yellow legal pad open on the counter like an accomplice. By 5:30, I was dressed in my best grey sport coat. The one Margaret always said made me look like I belonged on the cover of a fishing magazine. The drive to the Rusty Anchor was short but slow. Traffic from the highway fed into town in a steady line, tourists chasing whatever charm they thought they'd find in a weathered harbour. The Rusty Anchor sat at the end of the wharf, its shingles faded to a soft silver, windows glowing against the darkening sky. Inside, the air was warm with the smell of fried clams, buttered rolls, and the faint tang of sea salt that clung to the wood. The hostess, a young woman with a pen stuck behind her ear, smiled when I gave her my name and led me toward the back corner, where a round table waited under the watchful eye of an old ship's wheel, mounted on the wall. I was the first to arrive. That was intentional. I wanted to watch them come in, see the expressions on their faces before they knew what the night would hold. Lila arrived next, coat slung over one arm, her daughter Kayla trailing behind with a soccer bag bouncing against her hip. "Dad," she said brightly, leaning down to kiss my cheek. "Place looks the same as it did 20 years ago." "Some things don't change," I replied. Kayla mumbled a hello and immediately bent over her phone, thumbs flying. Marcus came in 5 minutes later, wearing a navy blazer that looked like it had just come off a dry cleaner's hanger. His wife Elaine followed, scanning the menu board as though she might find some investment tip hidden in the daily specials. "Dad," Marcus said, shaking my hand firmly. "Full turnout tonight, huh?" "Looks like it," I said. Troy was last, sauntering in at 6:10, smelling faintly of whiskey and cologne, his shirt untucked beneath a leather jacket. "Hope you ordered the calamari," he said, dropping into a chair like he owned it. We settled in, menus open, the clatter of silverware and hum of other tables filling the gaps. I watched them make small talk with each other. Lila asking Elaine about her job at the real estate office, Troy cracking a joke about a customer who tried to pay with Canadian coins, Marcus explaining a market trend to no one in particular. When the waitress came to take drink orders, I asked for coffee. Lila ordered a glass of Chardonnay, Marcus a Scotch neat, Troy a beer. The drinks arrived quickly, condensation beading on the glassware, steam curling from my cup. I let them talk through the appetizers: clam chowder for Marcus, fried pickles for Troy, shrimp cocktail for Lila, and waited until the plates were cleared before leaning forward. "I'm glad you all could make it," I began, my voice steady but loud enough to cut through the surrounding noise. "It's been too long since we've sat at the same table without a holiday forcing us into it." They nodded, polite smiles in place. "I've got something to tell you," I continued, "and I'd rather say it here in public, where we can all be civil." Marcus raised an eyebrow. Lila tilted her head, and Troy leaned back, stretching his legs out under the table. "Back in the spring," I said, "I sold the old 30-acre parcel out by the creek. Got a fair price for it. A little over $800,000 after taxes." Lila's eyebrows shot up. Marcus sat straighter. Troy's eyes narrowed just slightly. "That's a lot," Marcus said. "It is," I agreed, "and I thought long and hard about what to do with it. I could have split it 3 ways, could have given each of you a share outright. But before I decided, I wanted to see something first." Lila's wine glass hovered halfway to her mouth. "See what? Who would show up when I needed them?" I said, plainly. The air around the table shifted, just a subtle tightening, like the moment before a storm breaks. The clink of silverware and hum of other conversations faded in my ears as I looked at each of them in turn. The waitress passed by, balancing a tray of lobster tails for another table, but none of us glanced her way. "I tested you," I said. "Each of you. Quietly. Nothing impossible. Just small moments where I asked for help. The kind that costs time more than money." Lila set her glass down slowly. "Wait? Tested us?" "Yes," I said, my voice even. "Lila, I asked you for a ride to the cardiology clinic, told you I wasn't feeling up to driving. You said no. Too busy with clients, but you had time to ask me for money for a dress in the same breath." Her mouth opened, then shut. She looked down at the tablecloth, fingers tightening around her wine stem. "Marcus," I continued, "I asked for advice about a modest amount in savings. You didn't give me advice. You tried to take control of it entirely, to manage it yourself. You dismissed me when I wanted to understand it for myself." He sat back in his chair, jaw tightening. "I was trying to help," he said. "Help is listening first," I replied. Then I turned to Troy. "And you? I told you I lost my wallet at the park. Cash, license, everything. I asked you to help me look that night. You said you had to stay at work for tips, and suggested I call one of your siblings instead." Troy shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting to his beer. "It was a Sunday night, Dad. I needed that money. You'd have been fine. That's the point, I said quietly. You all assumed I'd be fine. You assumed I didn't really need you. But I did, not for the ride, or the advice, or the search. I needed to know where I stood with my own children. The silence that followed was thick enough to press against my chest. In the corner, a couple laughed over a shared plate of oysters, oblivious to the fracture happening 2 tables away. I'm not telling you this to punish you, I went on. I'm telling you because the decision has been made. The money from the land sale, every cent of it, is going to someone who showed up for me without being asked twice. Someone who asked how I was, before asking for anything else. Marcus leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Adam, he said flatly. Yes, I said. Adam. Leela let out a small, incredulous laugh. Your nephew, he's not even your kid. He's family, I said, in the way that matters. Troy shook his head, muttering something under his breath about betrayal. Marcus stared at me like he was calculating the angle of the blow. Leela looked away, blinking hard. This isn't about who deserves more, I said. It's about who's been there without a ledger in their head. And when I'm gone, I want my life's work, and my father's land, in hands I trust. The table felt colder, the air sharper. None of them spoke as the waitress came by with the check, setting it down like she was placing a stone between us. I paid in cash, left a tip, and stood. You don't have to like it, I said quietly. But you needed to know it. Then I walked out into the salt air, the sound of the harbor muffled by the pounding in my ears. The night air off the harbor was sharper than I expected. The wind slipping through my coat like it knew I was already raw. The glow from the rusty anchor's windows faded behind me as I made my way to the truck, each step feeling both heavier and lighter than the last. I didn't look back to see if any of them followed. I knew they wouldn't. Not tonight. The drive home was quiet, the only sound the low hum of the engine and the occasional gust of wind rocking the frame. My hands stayed steady on the wheel, but my thoughts ran in loops, fragments of the dinner replaying. Lila's eyes darting away, Marcus's calculating stare, Troy's muttered disbelief. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly as I'd left it. Still, dark, unchanged. That was the strange thing about decisions that shift the course of your life. The world outside doesn't even blink. Inside, I hung up my coat and sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where I'd written their names on the yellow pad weeks ago. I flipped to that page now, looking at each word, each note I'd made during the tests. The ink felt heavier tonight, like it carried more than just sentences. The phone rang just after 9. Lila, I answered on the second ring. Dad, she began, her voice tighter than usual. I didn't realize what that ride meant to you. I thought you'd be fine. I didn't know it was some kind of test. It wasn't a trap, I said. It was the truth, shown plain. She was quiet for a moment. So that's it? No second chance? I had 67 years of chances with you, I replied gently. This was just the first time I measured one. She hung up without another word. 10 minutes later, Marcus called. His tone was cooler, more deliberate. You're making a mistake, he said flatly. Adam's a good guy, sure, but he's not blood like we are. When things get tough, blood's what matters. Blood is the least effort God asks from us, I told him. What you do with it, that's what counts. He exhaled hard. You'll regret this. Then he was gone. Troy didn't call. I didn't expect him to. I sat there for a while, the kitchen clock marking out the seconds like a slow drum. In the quiet I realized something. I felt no regret, not even the sting of doubt. I took a clean sheet from the pad and wrote at the top, next steps. Below it, I listed the calls I'd need to make to finalize the transfer, the items I wanted Adam to have from the cedar chest, and the notes I'd write to each child, not to convince them, but to leave no confusion. This was the kind of clarity people chase for years and never find. I'd stumbled into it by simply watching who came when I called, and now that I had it, I wasn't letting go. Thursday afternoon carried the first real bite of winter. The sky over Fairview was a pale, washed-out blue, the kind that looks colder than it feels. I'd called Adam the night before and asked if I could take him to lunch, told him I had something important to tell him, and that I'd make the drive down. The trip took just over 4 hours, the highway unspooling through bare-limbed woods and quiet towns. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of Miller's Diner, the sun was already slanting low. Adam was waiting outside in a wool coat, a red scarf looped around his neck. He waved as soon as he saw me, that easy smile on his face. "Uncle Dan," he said, pulling me into a quick hug. "Long drive, you sure you're up for it?" "I wouldn't have made it if I wasn't," I said. "Come on, let's get inside before we freeze." Miller's smelled of fresh coffee and grilled onions, the kind of scent that clings to your clothes in a way you don't mind. We slid into a corner booth, the vinyl seats squeaking under us. Over burgers and coffee, we talked about nothing at first. His students, the college basketball team, a leak in his apartment roof. The landlord still hadn't fixed. It was comfortable, unforced, the kind of conversation you can only have with someone who isn't waiting for their turn to speak. When the plates were cleared, I leaned back and folded my hands on the table. "Adam, there's something I need to tell you, and I need you to just listen until I'm done." His brow furrowed, but he nodded. "All right." I told him everything, about the land sale, about the amount, the full 800,000 after taxes, about the quiet tests I'd run with Lila, Marcus and Troy, how each of them had failed in their own way, and how he, without knowing it, had passed simply by showing up in my life without being asked twice. He didn't interrupt, didn't shift in his seat, just kept his eyes on mine. "So," I finished, "I've put the money in an account with your name as beneficiary. When I'm gone, it'll be yours. No conditions, no strings. You've earned it." For a moment he said nothing. Then he leaned forward, voice low. "Uncle Dan, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I told him. "Just promise me you'll use it for something that matters to you. Not just to make life easier, though it should do that too, but to make life better." He nodded slowly, his eyes glassy. "You could have given it to them. They're your kids. But you gave it to me." "They had their chance," I said. "Blood makes you related. Actions make you family." He reached across the table, his grip firm around my hand. "I won't waste this, I swear it." We sat there for a long time after that, the din of the diner fading into background noise. For the first time since Margaret died, I felt the weight of the future lift off my shoulders. I wasn't leaving this world empty-handed. I was leaving it in good hands. When we finally stepped outside, the cold hit sharp, but it didn't feel unwelcome. We walked to our cars together, and as I started the truck, Adam knocked on the window. "You ever need me, for anything, you call. No test required." I smiled. "I know." The drive home was quiet, but the kind of quiet that feels earned. The week after seeing Adam, the cold settled in for good. Each morning the frost spread thicker across the lawn, and the furnace rattled awake like it had something to prove. The house felt different now. Not lighter exactly, but steadier, like a ship with its ballast set right. I spent the first 2 days finishing what I'd written on the yellow pad, notes to each of my children. Not long letters, but honest ones. Lila's began with how proud I'd been of the woman she'd built herself into, but also how hurt I'd been that a dress outweighed my health. Marcus's told him I respected his mind, but I couldn't trust his hands with what I'd earned. Troy said I'd always loved the boy who could make me laugh, but I needed the man to be someone who would stand beside me when it wasn't convenient. I sealed each note in an envelope with their name and the date, then put them in the cedar chest alongside the letter to Adam. The chest went back under its tarp in the garage, its brass hinges catching the light for just a second before the darkness covered them again. On Thursday, Marcus called. He didn't mention the dinner or the decision. Instead, he talked about the weather, about a client who'd closed a big deal, about nothing. I listened, answered where I needed to, and hung up knowing we were both leaving the important things unsaid. Leela sent a text that weekend with a picture of Kayla scoring a goal. No caption, just the photo. I sent back proud of her, and that was all. Troy didn't call. It struck me that this too was part of the test. The aftermath. Who would bridge the gap once the truth was on the table? And just like before, the answer was clear. The Sunday after Thanksgiving, Adam drove up. He didn't come empty-handed. He brought 2 pies from Miller's, a bag of groceries, and a new wool scarf, because yours looks like it's seen 2 wars, he said. We ate in the kitchen, the same table where the plan had been born on a yellow pad. No talk of money, just the clink of forks and the easy conversation of people who know where they stand with each other. When he left, I walked him out to his car. The cold air smelled faintly of snow. You did more than you know, Adam, I said as he opened the driver's side door. He grinned. You too, Uncle Dan. I watched his taillights disappear down the street before turning back toward the house. The porch light cast a warm circle on the steps, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Inside, I poured myself a coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the yellow pad still there, though most of its pages were filled. I flipped back to the first one, to the original list of names and the notes beside them. Then I closed it for good. Money, I realized, doesn't change people. It just shows you the measure of them. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it shows you the measure of yourself. I'd been tested too, in my own way, and I'd passed, not because of the money, but because I'd finally put it where it belonged. The wind rattled the window just then, and I smiled. Let it blow. The foundation was solid.